We here at the Hollywood Adventist Church have an incredible legacy of active people who have been so dedicated to God and to the city that He is seeking also to serve, that they've worked for years in this community and within these walls and outside of these walls, bringing people something better than what they had before. And being pastor here for almost a year and a half, I guess now, I've heard incredible stories, but I feel like I've become a repository of these stories, and I don't know if they're getting out. So this month, we are looking at the history of our local church here and of our greater brothers and sister churches elsewhere. So I wanted to have a storytelling time where the elders of our church these people who have worked for so long in this place can share these stories, because it's valuable. Did you ever sit at your grandparents' feet or on their lap and they told stories, and then as a kid you say, like, and then what happened, and then what happened? And even hearing stories about yourself is important, because when you were little you don't really remember, but as you grow up you say, I did what? And what type of, those stories are valuable. We have a legacy here and we want to pass those on to everyone here. About something like a half of us, Please come forward, those participating. Those of us who, half of us have come in the past year or 2 years to this congregation, and we don't know these stories. And those of you who were around, were you involved? But if you were involved, maybe you remember some things that you wish we were still active and doing today that we're not. So I've prepared some discussion questions, and we'll just be hearing some fantastic stories about our legacy here as an Adventist church. That is your legacy as well as my own. Do we have mics? Awesome. So, I would like all of you, hello, welcome, thank you very much for being a part. Wow, we have a lot of chairs. Would you share a moment when you realized, oh, this is what church is. This is church.
Yeah, it's kind of when what I'd grown up thinking it was collided with what I discovered about God here in Hollywood. And we'd been spending some time as a community learning what it meant to listen to one another and listen to our community, and it was in a context that we called missional action teams. And we were all new at it. We didn't know what we were doing, but the biggest rule was to listen and pay attention, and not to get at like some conclusion in 2 meetings or less, like task forces are often meant to do. We needed to sit back, breathe, and listen, and take a lot of time for one another. Our particular group was given a question that we had to wrestle with, and a text that we would read every week, the same text, immerse ourselves in that story. And we were asked to come up with an experiment that would help us discern how to be God's friends in the city. And it was a longer question, but that's kind of where it was in a nutshell. And toward the end of our work, we still didn't know what our experiment would be. And long story short, one day we ended up on the LA River at a meeting of graffiti artists from all over the world. One of our members knew about it, Chris Chin. He is an artist, and he was aware of this event, and his wife, and they invited us just to follow them down there. It was kind of random, and it wasn't really, quotes, supposed to be an answer to our question, but I remember walking down to the kind of dirty LA River on a Saturday afternoon, not really sure what we were doing. And
the broken beer bottles.
The broken beer bottles and toddlers in our tow. And went around the corner to see this huge gathering of artists from all over the world, really great at what they were doing. And there was one that caught my eye. it was like a breath of fresh air. Like you think of those commercials, I don't know, this might be an old commercial, but like with a piece of gum or a mint and you have this refreshing moment. Peppermint patties, I guess that's like from the 70s or 80s. That's kind of old. That's terrible. All right, well anyway, I felt this refreshing breeze when I looked at his work and I learned it was the name of an artist named Man One. And because we had learned to take time and listen to one another, both within our church walls and outside, we took the time over the next couple of months to get to know him. And he became a potential partner in ministry for a mural we were going to create on our wall, which we still are. But it's kind of like when you talk about Jesus coming back and you say it's going to happen soon. So our mural is kind of like that. But the experience of coming to this thing that hasn't happened yet was amazing. And I realized that ministry wasn't just about giving a Bible study to someone who wanted to know some answers to questions. It was finding God's partners around you.
I can share a story also related to the missional action teams. It was actually, I can remember our first meeting. I'm not sure if we were actually officially called missional action teams at that point, but it was in this hall over here. Corey and Terry were there, and it was I had been coming to the church probably less than a month or 2 months. And just the atmosphere of open listening and the dwelling in the scripture, I think really that was, like, it still sticks out in my memory as a point where I knew that this was a church that I could belong to and feel good about belonging to. I'm sure a lot of us have found ourselves outside of the traditional church structures and church ceremonies and boxes that we grew up in, and I really found that to be revelatory about, church doesn't have to be that same kind of stodgy thing that we all grew up with.
For me, it was probably when I started spending more time during the week at this building rather than just on a Saturday. So I don't know when I can pinpoint that, but it was for various things like the various workshops, or at the time I think we had some sort of debates here from the city council. There was also when we decorated the Christmas tree that one year. So it's just all kinds of stuff that would just happen during the week, and it would be almost as if the Sabbath was stretched out more than one day.
I think the nature of my journey with God is that every few years she has to remind me of something. And so I have these moments where I remember, or I have a revelation about what church is like at various churches. It doesn't, across my life, I've lived a lot of places. It's not going to happen at every church, but it has happened at some churches, and it certainly happened at this church. And I remember moving here at the beginning of 2008 from London very unexpectedly. I was crashing on a couch across the street with the worship leader, and within a few days of being here, he and the pastor were taking me out to dinner. Within 2 weeks, I was watching our church go to City Hall to advocate on behalf of people who were homeless and who had housing issues, and it was this physical realization of, oh, this is what church can be, this is what church is. Like Kirsten said, not this internal-looking thing, but saying, hey, God's already working out there. Why don't you see if you can join God in what she's doing?
I think what you're referring to is the missional church, the sent-out church, not the attractional church that says, come and check us out, see how good we are at putting on a performance, or however, look how great our speeches are. But it's being the hands and feet of Jesus, and I think that's when I felt the most like this is church is when I've been out there in the community listening mostly, not so much preaching, but listening to the neighbors, the city council, the Chamber of Commerce, the homeless, the various groups that work with the underprivileged, and the homeless, and also the business people and all that things. That, to me, I felt in church the most when I was out of church, and I think it's hard to explain, but unless you've been part of it, you just have to experience that sort of a missional sent out church.
I want you to close your eyes for a second. A little activity. You guys, close your eyes for a second, and I'm going to say a word, and I want you to think back over your time here in this church, and what do you see? What moment in time? So this is the word. Ministry. So who do you see around you? What moment was it? What year was it? Where were you standing? Like ministry.
I remember the what do you call it? Big Sunday. Sweeping the street with all these people with purple T-shirts on. Was it Highland? We planted trees and swept the things, and I thought, this is ministry. Call it what it is. That's just me, the strange street sweeper, purple-shirted street sweeper.
I saw, for me, it was going out to lunch with somebody who had come. One of the folks that comes to our lobby during the week and don't have a place to stay and don't have anything of their own, really, a few things, but yeah, to just go out to eat and say, hey, don't worry about anything for a while, let's just enjoy a meal together.
I had a lot come to my head, flooding actually, so I have to pick one. The first one that came to mind was a fellow ministry leader at the time, Maria, who was then and is still now employed by the Arthritis Foundation, had dragged a bunch of us to a walk. We didn't even, at the time when she pulled us there, we didn't even know what our connection was to the specific arthritis. Though then I remembered, Bill's mom was starting to deal with arthritis, and but we just didn't really know why we were there and what that had to do with church. But we ran into a woman in an Uncle Sam top hat named Laurie, and didn't know why we were meeting her. And over time, though, Maria would bring her to church with her. We would get to know her, and got more involved in some of these arthritis events. And Laurie, it turned out to be, was someone seeking a spiritual family. She'd actually tried to enter other church homes, and at some point, after being welcomed for a while, was sent out and said, you're not welcome here anymore. And she found safe space to worship a God that she knew existed, despite what people around her seemed to project him as. And just doing these, sometimes what seems like random things, going out and away from here, and knowing that whatever you do 24/7 during the week is a potential for ministry. When you talk to someone in a normal conversation, or they're doing their job in an arthritis walk and you're walking because you're not sure why, that's a potential for ministry. It's a potential for connecting with God as humans. And I was glad that we just sort of randomly ran into her and she found a church home.
And I don't think it's just the spiritual going out there. I mean, there's a lot of fun stuff too, right? All the football watching, Super Bowl watching parties, and those kind of things. But it's also just engaging with each other's lives. I remember a time when we have a lot of musicians or entertainers in our congregation, and we made it a mission to support their gigs. We would go out on during the week or on the weekends or whatever, and say, hey, so-and-so has this kind of a gig, let's support them. And I remember one of the strangest ones was Emily was teaching at a school in South Central LA, and she was teaching English, of all things, but there was a band competition on a Sabbath afternoon. And she said, my students, their parents work they're low income, mostly, and hardworking, and they work 7 days a week. And so their parents can't even come to their band competition to support them. And why don't you guys come and watch a band competition and a marching band competition? And so there we were, a couple cars and van loads of Hollywood purple people caravanning to this stadium in East LA somewhere, and then we watched them perform. They came to us afterwards and say, "This is great. We didn't even know we had so many supporters," because we were cheering for them like crazy. And again, here's the church outside the church doing supposedly unspiritual things, but I think that's where I felt with the most connected in ministry, so to speak. That we were ministering to people who had nobody else to appreciate what they were doing.
How do we become the purple church?
I'd like to answer that because many people say, especially those that don't have are offended by the color purple. Now, why do you keep calling yourself the purple church? In fact, this was a discussion that happened about 20 years ago, and there was an old-time member that didn't like the term purple. And the reality is the tiles of this church are white. The ceramic tiles on the upper part of the church, they're actually white. But apparently some sort of waterproofing material was applied to it, and ultraviolet light had its effect on this waterproofing, and the tile started to turn lavender, purple, periwinkle, whatever you want to call it. Wow. And so after a time, we just decided to paint the lower half to match the top. And so I'd like to say it's God that turned our church purple.
Amen. Amen. And you can see the white tiles on the front that the sun doesn't hit. It's still white. But then the top portion's lavender. It's just amazing.
So I think there's a good metaphor there.
It's incredible.
If the sun isn't reaching someplace, it never changes.
It remains pure white.
Right. And is that really better? Yeah.
And I think that the term purple and what has come to express for us over time, and someone else add to it or correct me if you think I'm completely off base, but I think we've come to kind of own the oddness of being a purple church, sort of, and that it expresses our value of just any you can be different and you belong. It's okay. And being purple is being okay with being different, and God loves just about all of us. All of us.
The music style in the church it has a history to it. Would you like to elaborate?
Okay. I wasn't here when the church decided to hire a band. Bill was here, but it was 1, 2, 3 pastors ago, I think. Yep. Is that right? Yeah, when Greg decided, we need to update our, what we're doing here, and do something that's musically with the church service that is relevant to what's going on in the culture around us, to connect with that and hopefully engage with people who are into more interesting music or more modern music. Yeah, so that was, I guess Greg went out to Musicians Institute, which is just down the street from us, and had some auditions and hired a band. And just like that, they called themselves the Danish Mafia. Some of them are still with us. Thomas, our guitar player, Jesper, our bass player, are both original members. Been playing here for like 15 years.
Actually, Scott Howden, who was our worship leader, he was a student at Musicians Institute, and he hired
Okay.
he introduced his friends
Yeah.
over there. And I remember Pastor Greg and Scott asking me to come along, and then they took me into this soundproof rehearsal room, and then they said, put on earplugs. And they actually gave me some earplugs, and I said, why? That you might not be used to this volume. But that was the start of a very good thing.
Yeah, and I think some people see the music as being a way to attract people here. Hopefully, kind of the old method of like you market something that's attractive and to get people in the door, and then they stick around, and and then they buy other things, right? Well, if we can get people in the door because of the music, maybe they'll stick around and buy into the sermon, right? I think there was some of that in the past. I don't think that's necessarily our focus anymore. At least I hope we've moved past that. A lot of people do first connect to the music here, and that's a reality that I feel really privileged to be a part of. When people say, hey, I came here because I liked the music. And then they do end up sticking around and getting involved, and that's always the hope. But my philosophy goes beyond that in saying that I think that here at this church, we talk about not having such strict separations between what's holy and what's not considered holy, or the sanctified and the secular. And I think there's tradition in that. In the Christian tradition, we have some history of that, of people, taking the bar tunes and writing Christian words for them, so people, tunes that people knew and could sing along to, and writing Christian words to sing, and those are some hymns in our hymnal now. And that's always been important to me, to recognize that our worship service and the things we do here need to be relevant to our current culture, and not simply instruments that were played 100 years ago and songs that were sung 100 years ago, but something that is current and connects with the way people are experiencing God now. And there's value in the old music, and I love singing the old music, mostly because the lyrics are so amazing, but some of the melodies are really beautiful too. And especially when we can find arrangements of the older hymns that have a more modern band take on them. I really love that, and that's just a personal preference. But I hope that our variety of music can appeal to a wide variety of people, and that's an important value, that we never just stick with, singing a bunch of songs that sound too similar from week to week, because it's important to realize that different people have different tastes, and worshiping God should go beyond that. It should transcend our musical taste, and it should transcend our, preference of style. So I hope that we can. My goal is always to incorporate multiple styles and multiple kind of variations on music to promote that.
Is there something that we've done in the past that you really enjoyed and think, boy, I think that would still be relevant in today's church, in our local church here? Is there something that you'd like to see brought back, or revive, or revisit?
Yeah, one thing that I think does go to the missional model that I do miss is there was a time when we were, or at least I felt like we were very much more active in the local city politics, and not necessarily campaigning or anything like that, but just there was a time that our members were at City Hall monthly, if not more often than that. Just, sitting at City Hall meetings, thank you, adding to public comment when that time was appropriate, and that was something that I really clicked with. And again, it's taking church outside of church. I mean, at the time, it was often related to either the mural project, which was being held back by some legal issues, just the city not being able to define what a mural is compared to what a billboard is, but also with our work with people with low incomes and affordable housing, that kind of engagement and involvement I would love to see our church get back into.
That reminds me of another image I had when you asked us to close our eyes and think of the word ministry. That connects with what Auburn is saying. When Bill and I committed to being here and making this our worship community, as we were having babies, sometimes I would look around and I'd say, this is like not really a family church. Like, families are not raised in Hollywood that go to church. Like, you just don't find very many like that. And so we actually have a community like that now where we have more children. But at that time, we were kind of looking around, and it was like us and the Alandes and the Tajwans at some point. And it was just like a few families. And I remember praying to God and saying, okay, well, we feel like we're called here, but you got to take care of our kids, because nobody else is right now. So God, help us raise our children to love you, even though they don't have all this children's programming that's perfect. And we were really worried about that. And I remember dragging them one day to, I think it was an action about affordable housing. And it was after daycare or school or something. They were pretty small. We came to Hollywood, drove to Hollywood, and it was a marching action thing, holding signs. Honestly, I'm not built to hold signs, walk around, and make noise. I mean, you see people on the news, and sometimes they say really embarrassing things. Like, I don't know, like, I didn't want to be one of those people, but I cared about the housing. My children were a little bit nervous about the activity as well, not quite sure what we were pulling them into. And but I said, well, this is an experiment. But you know, I think it took a year or 2 or 3 until they were middle elementary school, and on the way to school one morning, they expressed to me that they had gotten this connection between caring about our neighbors and housing and our faith in God. Like, it wasn't 2 separate things that we did. We didn't go out and do political stuff and then come and do church stuff. It was all wrapped up together. And I realized that they had learned that following God meant caring about my neighbor, and they learned it in a really tangible way.
We, here at the Hollywood Adventist Church, we give God space to work in our lives and in our community. How have you seen God work in this city and in this space?
To echo what Kirsten was saying about her kids, yeah, for a while there was no kid population to minister to, I guess, and then all of a sudden there was, and then so there was a need to be filled, and we had that need filled, I guess. And even though the numbers are not what a normal church would have, I think what the quality of what we're doing with, I mean, they probably don't want to be called teens, but the teen age range, I think, is more mature and more engaging than strictly going from a quarterly based Sabbath school. And then from that point, we were experimenting, and we weren't afraid to, I guess, fail, because we've incorporated what Rhonda was doing with her class, and I think everybody gets a lot out of it, and we're not talking down to you guys, looking at you too. I think the substance and the issues that we tackle in Sabbath school are engaging for all age ranges, and it's not like pat yourself on the back, look at us, we're Christians going to church on Sabbath school. It's more of what I think has been said here, and that we're taking something that we believe in and we're applying it to the world outside, and continuing church in a different way. And I find myself just as equally engaged in the conversation most Sabbaths than outside of this church. And I think that having that space to do that was great and is great. And I hope this is a little plug for our Sabbath school. So I hope that we can keep on growing.
I think the thing about having that space is also being in a space where you become vulnerable and have room to have your heart broken. And I think the thing that's been beautiful about Hollywood is that in a lot of ways, and it's not always been perfect, we have worked to make room where people can express pain, and where we, in being vulnerable, have our hearts broken, and that's not at all fun. You know, watching someone that you cared for die on a sidewalk in front of the church, watching people leave because they were disappointed in us. You know, I think this is the space we have, and this is the wrestling match that we have. But we keep having that conversation with ourselves and with God to try to create safer and safer spaces. And I think in that heartbreak we learn, and this is a difficult thing.
And it's not just the allowing God space within these walls. I think by going out, we have seen God working in the community. And for me, it's been a very liberating thing to know that it's not just, we don't need to generate all the activity in our church to be successful. God is already working out there. Before we even thought about affordable housing and the low income and the homeless, there have been dozen groups and communities already working on that outside, and all we did was join them. We didn't need to create our own Adventist branded ministry. God's work is already going out there, and that has led us to the winter shelter with the Presbyterian Church, my friend's place across the street, different organizations. And again, it's this sent out church, the church outside, that has, I think, made me realize that we don't need to give God space to do things. He has the whole world, he has the whole universe. He is working in it long before I showed up. And all I need to do is jump in and participate with him. Yeah,
it's true. We don't need to give God space. Sometimes we need to give ourselves space. We need to clear out some space in our own lives. And I echo what Leslie says, that I've seen God working in the times when we allow ourselves to really go deeper into what's really on our hearts. A lot of people come to Hollywood with big dreams about being successful, being a movie star or being a rock star, or just coming from all over the country, and we see that so often. And there are people that have come here with big dreams and have never seen those dreams fulfilled. People that have come feeling like they were called to do something great, to do something grand here in Hollywood, and for whatever reason, things haven't worked out the way they thought they would. And I think that happens to a lot of us, where things don't go the way we plan and things don't even go the way we hope. And what do we do with that? And how do we deal with that? And how do we process that? And not many churches where I've been a part of have allowed space to do that within a church community. We focus so much on praising God for what God has done and all the great things that God has done. And some churches, I feel, forget that sometimes we don't see all the great things that God has done because we're distracted by the ways we feel God has let us down. And it's important to acknowledge that, and important to let ourselves work through that as a way to understand it and to understand God better and understand how God is working. And I've seen we've had some times here when we've been able to talk about things like that, and that has been really meaningful I think for a lot of people. Myself included. Myself included. Yeah. Go ahead.
Inside of your program, we asked these wonderful people some of the texts that were very crucial in their understanding of the purpose of our church. And just to reiterate the prayer that we prayed this morning from Isaiah 58, this church has chosen a fast to loose the bonds of injustice, to let the oppressed go free and to break every yoke. It's to share our bread with the hungry and to bring the homeless poor into our house. When we see the naked, to clothe them, and not to hide ourselves from the people that are closest to us. And our light will break forth like the dawn, and our healing will spring up quickly. We are a church with an incredible legacy, and thank you for investing your lives, your years into this church, and thank you for giving us an example and for continuing to be with us, to shepherd us along. Thank you all very much. God bless you all.